The noise of the festival hall drowned out everything around. Hundreds of children were preparing for their performances. But at that moment, two girls froze, as if the entire world around them had disappeared. Their eyes met. "Is that you?" one whispered, her voice trembling. "I thought I'd never see you again." The other replied, barely holding back tears. 3 years of separation ended here, at the dance festival. But their joy was interrupted by the figure of their father, who, pale with shock, exclaimed, "You weren't supposed to meet." He wanted to separate them again. But what happened next changed everything. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to find out what happens next in this incredible story. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the modest house that had once been filled with laughter. Inside, the air was heavy with tension. The twins, barely 6 years old, sat huddled together on the warm couch, their small hands clasped tightly as if holding onto each other could keep the world from crumbling. Their mother paced the room, her face etched with worry, while the sound of heavy footsteps approached the door. The knock came, sharp and deliberate. The girls flinched, and their mother froze, her chest heaving with uneven breaths. She knew who it was, and she knew what he had come to do. "Please, not today," she whispered to herself before moving toward the door. When she opened it, the father stood there, his face a mask of cold determination. His tall frame cast a shadow over her, and in his eyes, there was no trace of the love they once shared, only bitterness. Behind him, the car idled, its engine a low growl that seemed to echo the tension in the air. "I've come for her," he said, his voice clipped and emotionless. "No, please, you can't do this," the mother pleaded, her voice trembling. She stepped out onto the porch, blocking his view of the girls inside. "They're just children. They belong together. You can't tear them apart." His jaw tightened, and he pushed past her, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on the twins. They stared back at him, wide-eyed and frightened, their innocence a stark contrast to the coldness in his demeanor. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice cold. "She's coming with me." The mother moved to block him again, her arms outstretched protectively. "They're all I have. Please, don't take one of them. I'll do whatever you want, just don't separate them." His lip curled into a sneer. "You think I'm doing this for them? I'm doing this for me. You don't deserve to keep them both." The twins began to cry, their small voices rising in fear. "Mama, no! Don't let him take us," they sobbed, clutching at each other like lifelines. The father's expression didn't waver. He reached out and grabbed one of the girls by the arm. She screamed, her tiny hands clinging desperately to her sister, who held on just as tightly. Their mother lunged forward, trying to pull them back together, but he was stronger, his grip unyielding. "Please," the mother begged, her voice breaking as she fought to keep the girls together. Tears streamed down her face, but the father's resolve was like steel. "You're hurting them. You're hurting all of us." He didn't respond. With one swift motion, he wrenched the girl free from her sister's grasp. The other twin screamed, reaching out for her as their connection was severed. The girl in his arms kicked and cried, her voice hoarse from screaming, but he didn't stop. He carried her out the door, leaving the mother collapsed on the floor, clutching the remaining child as though she might disappear too. Through the window, the twin left behind watched as the car sped away, her sister's cries fading into the distance. The mother whispered soothing words, but they both knew no comfort could fill the void that had just been torn into their lives. The house fell silent, except for the quiet sobs of the two left behind. The warmth that had once filled their home was replaced by an unbearable emptiness. The mother sat on the floor, her arms around her remaining daughter, and whispered through her tears, "I'll get her back. I promise, I'll bring her home." But even as she said it, she knew the fight ahead would be unlike anything she had ever faced. The days after the separation were heavy with silence. The girl who stayed with her mother, Amara, often sat by the window, her small face pressed against the glass, watching the world outside but seeing none of it. Her sister's laughter, once a constant melody in their home, was now replaced by a haunting stillness. She held on to the little things, a worn-out doll they used to play with together, a shared drawing they had made just days before they were torn apart. Each item was a painful reminder of what she had lost. Her mother tried to fill the void, showering Amara with love and warmth, but even her gentle touch couldn't mend the fracture. At night, Amara cried softly into her pillow, whispering her sister's name like a prayer. She couldn't understand why someone who was a part of her, who shared her very soul, was suddenly gone. "Where is she, Mama?" she asked one evening, her voice trembling. "Why can't we go find her?" Her mother knelt beside her, tears glistening in her eyes. "She's with your father, baby. But I promise you, I'm going to bring her back. We'll be together again. I swear it." Amara wanted to believe her, but as weeks turned into months, her sister became a distant echo, a phantom that lived in her heart but no longer in her life. Her father's home was large but cold, its walls devoid of warmth or color. The cheerful chaos of their shared childhood was replaced with strict routines and harsh discipline. Aaliyah was expected to be quiet, obedient, and invisible. Her father rarely spoke of her mother and forbade any mention of Amara. "If I hear her name in this house," he had warned one evening, his voice low and threatening, "there will be consequences." Aaliyah quickly learned to keep her thoughts to herself, but it didn't stop the memories from flooding her mind. At night, she would close her eyes and try to recall the sound of Amara's giggle or the way they used to whisper secrets under the covers. Sometimes, she would dream of their games, only to wake up to the stark reality of her lonely room. Her father's rules extended to every aspect of her life. He monitored her closely, making sure she excelled in school and followed his every instruction. She attended dance classes, not because she wanted to, but because he insisted. "Discipline builds character," he would say. But for Aaliyah, each day felt like walking on a tightrope, her true self buried beneath layers of fear and compliance. Amara, despite her mother's efforts, felt the weight of the missing half of her soul. She struggled in school, her teachers often noting how quiet and withdrawn she had become. She spent hours drawing pictures of two girls holding hands, always leaving space for the sister who wasn't there. For Aaliyah, the void manifested in a different way. She poured herself into dance, finding brief moments of escape in the movements. But even in her most graceful pirouettes, she felt incomplete. She would glance at the mirrored walls of the studio and imagine Amara standing beside her, mirroring her steps. But when she turned her head, the space next to her was always empty. On opposite sides of their separated lives, both girls would sometimes look up at the same night sky, wondering if the other was doing the same. They didn't know where the other was, but they felt each other's presence in the quiet moments, in the laughter of other children, in the songs they used to sing together, in the silence that followed when those memories faded. Each passing day brought its own challenges, but deep down, both Amara and Aaliyah clung to the faint hope that one day, they would find their way back to each other. It was a hope that kept them going, even when the emptiness felt overwhelming. The morning sun streamed through the thin curtains of the small apartment, casting soft patterns on the walls. The mother, Nadine, sat at the kitchen table, her fingers gripping a worn pencil as she filled out yet another form. The papers before her seemed endless, legal documents, appeals, and letters she had written to lawyers who rarely responded. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Every night, after putting Amara to bed, she sat in the dim glow of a flickering lamp, poring over every detail of her case. Her heart ached for Aaliyah, the daughter she could no longer tuck in at night, the other half of her world ripped away by a man who had used his power not out of love, but spite. The memory of that day haunted her, the way Aaliyah had cried for her, her little arms reaching out as the car sped away. "I'll bring you back," Nadine whispered into the quiet apartment, as if Aaliyah could somehow hear her. "I promise." The world outside her door was not kind to women like Nadine, black, single, and struggling to make ends meet. Her neighbors often offered polite words but little else. "You're wasting your time," one had said when she first shared her intention to fight for custody. "The system isn't built for people like us." Even the lawyers she approached seemed reluctant to take her case. One of them, a sharp-dressed man with a patronizing smile, had said, "It's admirable, but fathers have rights too. You'd be fighting an uphill battle. Are you sure you can afford this?" His words had stung, but they only fueled her determination. She couldn't afford to lose hope, not when her daughter needed her. At every turn, Nadine faced not just legal hurdles but the unspoken prejudice that seemed to follow her like a shadow. In courtrooms and waiting rooms, she noticed the subtle dismissals, the way people avoided her gaze or spoke to her with veiled condescension. The father's polished appearance and steady income painted him as a stable provider, while Nadine was viewed as just another struggling mother. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't see the nights Nadine stayed up stitching clothes to sell or the early mornings when she scrubbed floors at the diner to make ends meet. They didn't see how she stretched every dollar to ensure Amara had everything she needed, all while saving what little she could for her legal battle. Through it all, Amara was her anchor. The little girl, though young, seemed to understand the weight her mother carried. She would sit beside Nadine as she worked, coloring pictures of their family with her sister always included. "This is us when Aaliyah comes back," she'd say, her voice filled with innocent certainty. Those moments kept Nadine going. She couldn't bear the thought of Amara growing up without her sister, of Aaliyah believing she had been forgotten. Months turned into years, and the fight wore on. Nadine's savings dwindled, and the burden of rejection after rejection weighed heavily on her. But one day, while working at the diner, she overheard a conversation between two patrons. They spoke of a lawyer known for taking on cases others deemed unwinnable. The next day, Nadine showed up at his office, her hands trembling as she clutched a folder filled with every scrap of evidence she had gathered. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, listened intently as she poured out her story. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "It won't be easy. But I believe you have a case." For the first time in years, Nadine felt a flicker of hope. With the lawyer's help, Nadine began to build her case. They gathered testimonies, documented the father's neglect, and prepared for a battle that would test every ounce of her strength. Though the road ahead was uncertain, Nadine knew one thing: she wouldn't stop until her daughters were reunited. Every step forward, no matter how small, brought her closer to fulfilling the promise she whispered to Aaliyah every night. Her fight was far from over, but Nadine was ready. She had no choice but to keep going, for herself, for Amara, and most of all, for the little girl who still called her mama in her dreams. The echoes of laughter and music filled the small studio as Amara spun across the wooden floor, her movements light and fluid. Her mother clapped from the corner, her face glowing with pride. "That's it, sweetheart," she encouraged, her voice warm. "Feel the music, let it guide you." Amara beamed, her steps becoming even more confident. Dancing had become her sanctuary over the years, a place where she could forget the pain of separation, if only for a little while. Each step, each twirl, was a way to connect with the sister she still missed deeply. Though she couldn't see Aaliyah, Amara often imagined her dancing beside her, their steps perfectly in sync as they once were. The upcoming festival was the biggest event of the year, and Amara poured her heart into every practice session. Her mother had worked extra shifts to afford the costume, a flowing dress in shades of lavender that made Amara feel like a princess. "This is your moment," her mother said one evening as she hemmed the dress. "Dance for yourself. Dance for her." Amara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had made a silent promise to herself: this performance would be for Aaliyah, wherever she was. Meanwhile, miles away, Aaliyah's world was very different. The walls of her dance studio were stark and clinical, the air heavy with tension. Her father stood in the corner, his arms crossed, his critical gaze fixed on her every move. Again, he barked as she stumbled slightly in her turn. "You're not here to embarrass me." Aaliyah bit her lip, her small hands trembling as she adjusted her posture and tried again. Dancing had once been a joy, a way to escape the rigid confines of her father's home. But now it felt like another obligation, another box to check on the long list of his expectations. Her teacher, a severe woman with sharp features, clapped her hands impatiently. "Focus, Aaliyah. This isn't a game." Aaliyah nodded, swallowing her frustration. Her costume, a stiff and formal outfit chosen by her father, hung on a rack nearby. It was beautiful, but it felt like a cage, just like everything else in her life. Still, she practiced tirelessly, driven not by passion but by the fear of disappointing her father. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Aaliyah would sneak into her room and dance in the moonlight, her movements freer, her heart lighter. In those moments, she allowed herself to remember Amara. She would close her eyes and imagine her sisters laugh, the way they used to mirror each other's steps. "I wonder if you're dancing too," she whispered one night, tears slipping down her cheeks. The festival hall buzzed with excitement, a sea of bright costumes and lively chatter filling every corner. Children hurried between rehearsals, teachers gave last-minute instructions, and the air smelled faintly of hairspray and stage makeup. The sound of music spilled from one end of the hall to the other as groups practiced their routines in tight formations. Amara stood near the edge of the room, adjusting the delicate folds of her lavender costume. Her mother fussed with the ribbons in her hair, but Amara barely noticed. Her eyes scanned the room, her heart beating faster than it had all morning. A strange feeling tugged at her chest, an anticipation she couldn't explain. It wasn't just nerves about performing. It was something deeper, almost like a whisper in her soul that she was on the brink of something extraordinary. Across the hall, Aaliyah stepped quietly into the chaos, her father trailing behind her with his usual stern expression. She clutched her dance bag tightly, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Her costume, a pristine white dress adorned with gold accents, shimmered under the fluorescent lights. Aaliyah adjusted the straps on her shoulders, trying to push down the unease she always felt when her father was near. But today, there was another emotion beneath it, something she couldn't name but that made her feel both anxious and hopeful. And then, it happened. A frozen moment. Amara's gaze landed on a figure across the hall, and her breath caught. The girl in the white dress had her back turned, but something about her posture, the way her shoulders curved ever so slightly inward, sent a jolt through Amara's chest. Aaliyah turned, her movements slow, almost hesitant, as though she felt the weight of someone's eyes on her. Their gazes met across the bustling room, and in that instant, everything around them seemed to fade. The music, the voices, the hurried footsteps, all of it melted away, leaving only the two of them standing on opposite sides of the hall. Amara's lips parted in disbelief. Her heart thundered in her chest as she took a tentative step forward. "Aaliyah," she whispered, the name trembling on her lips. Aaliyah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. She couldn't speak, she could barely breathe. The sister she had dreamed of, cried for, and longed to see for 3 long years was standing right there, just a few feet away. "Amara," she finally choked out, her voice barely audible. Joy and heartbreak. Amara ran toward her, her lavender dress flowing behind her like a cloud. Aaliyah dropped her bag, rushing to close the distance between them. When they reached each other, their arms wrapped around one another in a fierce embrace. Tears streamed down their faces as they clung to each other, their sobs breaking the silence that had enveloped them. "You're here," Amara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd never see you again." "I missed you so much," Aaliyah replied, her words muffled against her sister's shoulder. I thought you forgot about me." "Never," Amara said, pulling back just enough to look into her sister's eyes. "Not for a single day." The moment was both joyous and heartbreaking. The weight of their separation pressed down on them, but the joy of reunion lifted them up. For a moment, they were just two sisters again, as if no time had passed, as if nothing had ever torn them apart. The festival hall, once alive with music and joy, now crackled with tension. The father stood frozen for a moment, watching the two girls embrace, their tears mingling with whispered words of love and reunion. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. The sight of them together, after all his efforts to keep them apart, filled him with a rage that boiled just beneath the surface. With measured steps, he strode through the crowd, his polished shoes striking the floor with a sharp, deliberate rhythm. His stern expression was enough to part the sea of children and teachers who watched with curious eyes. The closer he came to the girls, the darker his presence seemed to grow. "Aaliyah," he barked, his voice slicing through the muffled whispers and chatter. "Step away from her. Now." The girls froze in each other's arms. Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat, the years of her father's control making her instinctively want to obey. But Amara tightened her grip on her sister, her own resolve hardening. She stepped in front of Aaliyah, her small frame shielding her as if daring him to come closer. "She's my sister," Amara said, her voice trembling but determined. "You can't take her away again." Her words only fueled his anger. "This is not your place," he spat, his eyes narrowing. "Aaliyah, come here. You belong with me." Aaliyah hesitated, her heart pounding. The years of fear, the endless rules, and the loneliness under her father's roof weighed heavily on her. But so did the warmth of her sister's embrace, the freedom she had felt in just those few moments of being reunited. "No," she said softly, her voice barely audible. But then, she straightened her back, her grip tightening on Mara's hand. "I'm not going with you." The father's face darkened, his carefully composed expression slipping for a moment into something more primal. His voice, though still low, carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "Do not test me, Aaliyah. This is not a discussion." The tension in the room was suffocating. Teachers nearby exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene. The other students watched wide-eyed, their performances forgotten. It was as though the festival had come to a standstill, every eye drawn to the storm unfolding in the center of the room. Aaliyah stepped forward, her hands still clasped with Amara's. Her legs trembled, but her voice grew stronger. "You've controlled everything about my life for 3 years. You told me I couldn't talk about my mother, about Amara. You made me feel like I had to forget them just to make you happy." She paused, her voice cracking. "But I can't. I won't." The father's face turned a deep shade of red, and his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You don't understand what you're saying," he hissed, his voice dripping with barely contained fury. "You're a child. You don't get to make these decisions." "Yes, I do," Aaliyah countered, surprising even herself with the force of her words. "And I'm done living like this. I want to be with my family. I want to be with my sister." Amara squeezed her hand, her heart swelling with pride. "We belong together," she said, her voice steady and clear. "You can't stop us." The father glanced around, noticing the growing crowd of onlookers. His lips pressed into a thin line as he forced himself to rein in his temper. He couldn't afford to lose control here, not in front of so many witnesses. But the fury in his eyes was unmistakable, a storm barely contained. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice low but laced with menace. "You think you can just walk away from me? I'll deal with this later. Both of you will regret this." His words sent a chill through the air, but neither girl flinched. Aaliyah, for the first time in years, felt the weight of her fear lifting. She wasn't alone anymore. Together, she and Amara stood as one, their hands clasped tightly, their hearts beating in unison. Before the father could say another word, one of the teachers stepped forward, her voice firm and unwavering. "Sir, this is a school event, and your behavior is inappropriate. If you have concerns, they can be addressed elsewhere." The father turned his glare on her, but the teacher didn't back down. Behind her, other staff members moved closer, creating a protective barrier between him and the girls. He realized he was outnumbered, his threats hollow in the face of so many witnesses. With a final glare at Aaliyah and Amara, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the hall, his presence leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The girls watched him go, their hands still intertwined. For the first time in years, they felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to reclaim the life they had been denied. Amara turned to her sister, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "You stood up to him." Aaliyah nodded, her own tears streaming down her face. I couldn't have done it without you. In that moment, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their bond, once torn apart, was now unbreakable. The air in the festival hall was electric, the kind of energy that came from months of preparation culminating in one defining moment. Despite the earlier confrontation, Amara and Aaliyah stood backstage, their hands still clasped tightly. The tension that had gripped the room moments ago now simmered beneath the surface, but the girls weren't thinking about their father anymore. Their focus was on each other, and on the stage that awaited them. Amara adjusted the lavender ribbons on her costume, her hands shaking slightly. Aaliyah noticed and reached out, her own fingers steady despite the storm she had just faced. We've got this, Aaliyah said, her voice firm but soft. We're together now. That's all that matters. Amara looked at her sister, tears glistening in her eyes but a determined smile breaking through. Together, she echoed. Their names were called, and a hush fell over the crowd as the announcer introduced the next performance. Representing their respective schools, please welcome Amara and Aaliyah. As they stepped onto the stage, the lights brightened, casting a warm glow over the polished floor. The music began, a soft melody that built into a powerful crescendo. For a moment, the sisters froze, their eyes locking. The crowd faded away. The stage felt like theirs alone, a space where years of pain, longing, and hope could finally take form. Amara moved first, her body flowing with the music, each step a testament to her freedom and resilience. Aaliyah followed, her movements precise but filled with a new grace that came from being beside her sister. They danced as if they had never been apart, their movements perfectly synchronized, their bond visible in every twirl and leap. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching the two girls transform their shared pain into something extraordinary. Every spin and gesture told a story of love lost and found, of strength and unity, of defying the odds. As the music swelled, the sisters reached the climax of their routine. They moved toward each other, their hands meeting in the center of the stage. For a brief moment, they stood still, their heads bowed as if paying tribute to the years they had lost. Then, with a burst of energy, they launched into the final sequence, spins and jumps that seemed to defy gravity, their smiles radiant under the stage lights. The audience erupted into applause before the music even finished. The girls struck their final pose, their hands still joined, their faces flushed with triumph. They turned to each other, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. The hall could have been empty, and it wouldn't have changed the way they felt, whole, united, and unbreakable. As they exited the stage, the applause grew louder, mingled with cheers and whistles. Teachers and students alike rose to their feet, clapping with an intensity that sent vibrations through the floor. Amara and Aaliyah exchanged a look of disbelief, then burst into laughter. It wasn't just joy, it was relief, a release of all the tension and pain they had carried for so long. Backstage, their mother rushed toward them, her arms outstretched. She had arrived just in time to see their performance, her heart swelling with pride and emotion. "You were incredible," she cried, pulling both girls into a tight embrace. "You showed them what it means to be sisters." The medals were awarded shortly after, the golden discs glinting in the light as they were placed around the girls' necks. As they stood on the stage together, holding their medals high, the room erupted in applause once more. This wasn't just a victory for their dance, it was a victory for their bond, a testament to the strength that had carried them through 3 years of separation. Later that evening, after the festival had ended and the crowd had dispersed, Amara and Aaliyah sat together on the steps outside the hall. The night air was cool, and the stars above sparkled like the medals around their necks. "I didn't think I could do it," Aaliyah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you gave me strength." Amara leaned her head against her sister's shoulder, her voice soft but steady. "We gave each other strength. And we always will." The sisters sat there for a while longer, their hands entwined, their hearts lighter than they had been in years. For the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. Together, they had proven that no amount of distance, no force in the world could break the bond they shared. And this performance was just the beginning of their new chapter. The festival had ended, but the warmth of victory lingered in the air as Amara and Aaliyah stepped into the cool evening. Their medals clinked softly as they walked side by side, their hands tightly clasped. For the first time in years, they felt whole again, their hearts light despite the challenges they knew still lay ahead. Amara turned to Aaliyah, her eyes sparkling. "Let's go home," she said, a smile spreading across her face. Aaliyah hesitated, the word home hanging heavy in the air. For 3 years, home had been a cold, rigid place devoid of love. But the thought of their mother, the woman she hadn't seen since she was ripped away, filled her with longing. She nodded. "Let's surprise her." The bus ride back to their mother's home was quiet but charged with emotion. The sisters sat close, their heads leaning against each other. Amara told Aaliyah about the little apartment, the drawings she had kept of them together, and their mother's endless efforts to bring her back. Aaliyah listened, tears forming in her eyes as she realized how much she had been missed. "She never gave up on you," Amara said softly. "Not for a single day." Aaliyah reached for her sister's hand, her grip firm. "I never stopped thinking about her. Or you." When the bus finally stopped, the sisters stepped off, their breaths visible in the crisp night air. Amara led the way, her heart pounding as they approached the small, familiar building. The light in the window was still on, casting a soft glow onto the street. Inside the apartment, their mother, Nadine, sat at the kitchen table, a half-folded stack of laundry before her. She was tired, as always, but her heart felt lighter knowing Amara had performed so beautifully at the festival. She smiled to herself, imagining the lavender costume she had worked so hard to finish fluttering on stage. A sudden knock at the door startled her. It was late, too late for visitors. Wiping her hands on her apron, she made her way to the door, curiosity mingling with caution. When she opened it, her breath caught. "Hi, Mama," Amara said softly, stepping forward. Behind her, Aaliyah stood, her gold medal glinting under the porch light. She was nervous, unsure of what to say, but her heart leapt as she saw her mother's face transform, shock melting into recognition, and then into uncontainable joy. Nadine's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Aaliyah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's me, Mama," Aaliyah replied, her own tears streaming freely. "I'm home." Nadine pulled both girls into her arms, her sobs mingling with their own. She held them as tightly as she could, as though letting go might mean losing them again. The weight of 3 years of pain and separation dissolved in that moment, replaced by a joy so pure it was almost overwhelming. "My girls," Nadine murmured, kissing their foreheads. "You're together again. My beautiful girls." Amara and Aaliyah clung to her, their hearts full. For the first time since they were 6 years old, they felt like a family again. Inside, the apartment glowed with warmth as the three of them sat together, sharing stories and laughter late into the night. Nadine listened intently as Aaliyah spoke of the years spent with her father, the rules, the loneliness, the longing for her mother and sister. Nadine's heart ached, but she held her daughter's hand tightly, silently vowing to never let her go again. Amara chimed in with tales of the small triumphs and struggles she and their mother had faced, painting a picture of resilience and love that had carried them through the darkest times. "We never stopped hoping," Nadine said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "And now you're here. We're whole again." As the night wore on, the sisters grew drowsy, their heads resting against their mother's shoulders. Nadine gently stroked their hair, her heart filled with a peace she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, the apartment didn't feel too small or too quiet. It felt like home. As she looked down at her daughters, Nadine whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. The road ahead might still be difficult, but this moment, this reunion, was a promise of better days to come. And for the first time in a long time, she believed in that promise. The phone rang late in the evening, its sharp sound cutting through the peaceful stillness of the apartment. Nadine, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea in hand, felt her stomach tighten as she glanced at the caller ID. She knew who it was before even picking up. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the phone. "Hello," she answered, her voice calm but wary. The reply came immediately, cold and biting. "You had no right," her ex-husband spat. "You think you can just take her from me? That's kidnapping, Nadine." Nadine's grip on the phone tightened. "She came back to her family," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "She chose to be here." "She's a child," he snapped. "She doesn't get to make that choice. I'm her father, and I have every legal right to take her back. Don't think for a second that I won't." From her spot on the couch, Aaliyah watched her mother's face carefully, the fear she had lived with for years creeping back into her chest. She knew her father's tone too well, the icy authority, the unspoken threat behind every word. "I won't let you hurt them again," Nadine said, her voice stronger now. "Not her. Not either of them. You'll regret this," he said, his voice lowering into something darker. "I'll see you in court." The line went dead, but the weight of his words lingered in the air. Nadine set the phone down, her hands shaking slightly. She looked at Aaliyah, who had come to stand beside her, her small hand resting on her mother's arm. "I'm not going back," Aaliyah said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I don't want to live with him anymore." Nadine knelt, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "You're not going anywhere," she whispered. "I'll fight for you. I'll fight for both of you." The next morning, Nadine began the grueling process of preparing for a custody battle. She reached out to the lawyer who had once offered her hope during her search for Aaliyah. When she explained the situation, his voice was calm but serious. "This won't be easy," he said. "The system is slow, and fathers often have the upper hand. But if Aaliyah is willing to speak up, we have a chance." Aaliyah nodded resolutely when Nadine explained the plan. "I'll tell them everything," she said. "I'll tell them how he made me feel, how he tried to make me forget about you and Amara." The mother and daughter spent hours gathering evidence, letters, photographs, even Aaliyah's dance certificates, which proved how much her mother had supported her passion. Amara, too, joined in, drawing pictures of their family together and writing a letter about how much she missed her sister during those years apart. When the court date arrived, Nadine walked into the courthouse holding Aaliyah's hand tightly. She felt the stares as they passed through the hallways, the subtle, judgmental glances from people who didn't need to say a word to convey their assumptions. She was just another struggling black mother to them, fighting against a man who seemed more polished, more stable in the eyes of the law. In the courtroom, her ex-husband's lawyer wasted no time painting Nadine as unfit. She removed Aaliyah from a stable environment without any legal authority, he argued. "My client has provided structure, discipline, and a secure home. This so-called reunion was an impulsive and emotional decision, not what's best for the child." Nadine clenched her fists under the table, her heart pounding as the words cut deep. But when her lawyer spoke, the tide began to shift. He presented evidence of the emotional and psychological toll Aaliyah had endured under her father's care. Aaliyah herself spoke, her voice trembling but clear as she described the isolation, the rigid rules, and the pain of being torn away from her sister and mother. "I don't want to go back," she said firmly, her eyes locking onto the judge's. "I want to stay with my mom. That's where I belong." The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with anticipation as everyone awaited the judge's final decision. Nadine sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. On either side of her, Amara and Aaliyah held her hands, their presence a quiet but powerful symbol of the bond they had fought so hard to preserve. The judge shuffled a stack of papers, her expression unreadable as she began to speak. "After reviewing the evidence and considering the testimonies, it is clear to this court that the best interests of the children are served by awarding full custody to their mother, Nadine Harper." The words hit like a wave. For a moment, Nadine couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, the reality of the ruling sank in, and tears welled in her eyes. She turned to her daughters, who were already embracing her, their joy spilling over in laughter and sobs. The battle was over. They were finally free. Across the room, her ex-husband's face hardened, his lips pressed into a thin line. He stood abruptly, storming out of the courtroom without another word. Nadine watched him leave but felt no satisfaction in his defeat, only relief that her daughters were safe. That evening, the three of them returned to their small apartment, the weight of years of separation and fear lifted from their shoulders. The door creaked open, and for the first time, the space felt like a true home. Aaliyah set her bag down and took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room she had only heard about in Amara's stories. "This is where you grew up?" she asked, her voice soft. Amara nodded, pulling her sister toward the couch. "It's not much, but it's home. And now it's ours." Nadine watched them with a smile, her heart full as she moved to the kitchen to prepare dinner. It was a simple meal, spaghetti and salad, but as they sat together at the small table, it felt like a feast. The girls laughed and shared stories, their voices filling the room with a warmth Nadine hadn't felt in years. In the days that followed, the family began to settle into their new life. Aaliyah adjusted quickly, her once tense shoulders relaxing as she grew accustomed to the rhythm of their home. She and Amara shared a room, often staying up late to talk, giggle, and catch up on the years they had missed. Nadine worked tirelessly to provide for them, taking on extra hours at the diner but always making time to be present in their lives. The girls returned to school, where they quickly became known not just for their shared talent and dance but for their unwavering support of each other. They were inseparable, a living testament to the strength of their bond. Word of their story began to spread, starting with a local newspaper article and quickly reaching beyond their small community. People were moved by Nadine's relentless fight, by the girls' resilience, and by the love that had triumphed over cruelty and injustice. Letters began arriving at their apartment, messages of support, admiration, and even apologies from strangers who had been touched by their journey. One evening, as they sat together reading some of the letters, Amara looked up at her mother. "Do you think this will help people?" she asked. "Do you think it will make things better?" Nadine smiled, brushing a hand through Amara's curls. "I think it will remind people of what's possible when we stand up for what's right. And maybe it will help others find the courage to do the same." As the months passed, their lives began to feel normal, something Nadine had almost forgotten how to hope for. The girls continued to dance, their performances now carrying even deeper meaning. They danced not just for themselves but for each other, for their mother, and for everyone who had ever felt powerless. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Aaliyah leaned against her mother and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." Nadine kissed the top of her head, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I'd fight for you 1,000 times over." This story is a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the fight against injustice. What do you think about Nadine's journey and the strength of her family? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the strength of the human spirit.